Mr. Davis, in regards to drug, how bad is drug in Anacostia?
It's at a critical point. From my observation, I'm not an expert. I don't profess to be an expert on drugs, but Southeast Neighborhood Action Board Incorporated.
Testing, I'm steady. Testing, testing, testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Testing, running a test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Ooh, feedback. Feedback. Okay.
The line was tied up, so I wasn't able to reach it.
Well, you can suggest her name, nominate her. Now, we suggested in the letter that we get, we only asked that incoming. And I would like to have what business we have to take care of tonight to be completely finished by 8:30, and I think we can do that without rigging the election or without and nothing would be missed at all. First of all, what I would like to do is, of course, thank you for coming, and on this new departure or embarkation is to publicly thank those members of the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum Advisory Board who have labored and who have struggled hard and long for the last 5 years in the growth and development of this, what I must say, very unique and creative museum under the auspices of the Smithsonian Institution. The chairman of that board has been the man to my right side, Mr. Alton Jones. And since the very inception of the advisory board and development of the museum, Mr. Jones has served in a very distinguished fashion as the chairman of that board. Of course, many of us on the staff have operated in such a fashion that perhaps some of you, and they operated in such a fashion that perhaps you didn't know that they existed. But at any rate, we have happily felt the presence of the advisory board, and that presence has been the difference between the relative success and possible failure of this museum. So without further ado, I would like to say with regard to the advisory board that the advisory board decided initially that we wouldn't have that many rules or become so regularized that it would become a clumsy, innocuous kind of thing. Fletcher, we ask him to be a little quiet, please. And that anybody who showed up would be a member. And we want to try to keep that kind of flexibility. We want to try to keep that kind of involvement so that the masses in our community do feel a part of this endeavor. And we don't want to develop it to the extent that we exclude not only anybody in this community from participating in our efforts, but that we exclude anybody in the general metropolitan area from being of aid, being assistance, and being involved in our efforts here simply because of the universal application of the idea of the neighborhood museum. However, as we have moved along, things have become much more complex, much more intense, where we have felt the need to have an advisory board that will be more regularized in its attendance, much more in-depth in its application to the affairs of this museum. Just to give you an indication of what I mean, after 5 years of experimenting, and indeed it has been an experiment, and I use that in the past tense, as far as I'm concerned, it is no longer an experiment, and I would suggest by implication that the advisory board is no longer an experiment, to see if in fact local people here in Anacostia could give adequate direction to an institution the type of a museum. So over a period of maturity, the museum has grown, the advisory board has grown, and we're seeking greater and more definitive application of that advisory board's attention to the affairs of this institution, and we have felt the need to become more firmly organized. With regard to that, an ad hoc committee was appointed by the chairman. Those persons serving on the ad hoc committee were Mr. Almore Dale, Mrs. Lillian Smallwood, and the chairman, Mr. Alton Jones. They labored hard to try to come up with bylaws, and they worked with Mr. Ward Hamilton to come up with articles of incorporation so that this organization, the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum Associates, could be given birth. This would be the governing board, the board of directors of the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum. In addition to that, a nominating committee was appointed, and that committee was chaired by the Reverend Larry Lewis. He was assisted by his wife, Kathy Lewis, Mrs. Louise Hutchinson, and of course the chairman also served on that committee. They labored hard and valiantly to come up with a list of nominees. Now I might suggest here that there have been a long list of people, there has been a long list of people who've been involved with us over the years in one capacity or another. And we didn't want to set up a system that would obviate out or make those who've been involved with us feel that, well, the museum's getting organized now, and as a friend of mine told me last night, they don't know who their friends are or who their friends were. So that we wouldn't do that. And this museum has been a place where there has been a minimum of tight friction and bickering, the type that I'm not afraid to say does go on in many of the other institutions of our community. So what we did was that on our original advisory list, we called those people who had been involved with us and asked them pointedly if they were put in nomination, would they willingly serve on the board of directors? And I might say, with exception to one person, everybody agreed, and that one person was a person I happened to call among the other listing that I had. And in addition to that, several other names were added to the list of nominees. So, in a word, I've suggested to you that there has been a long and tedious job undertaken by the ad hoc committee on bylaws, and I've told you who they were, the ad hoc committee on nomination for the board of directors, and I've told you who they were, and the results of their work will be voted on tonight. Before we move further with Mr. Jones and the ratification of bylaws, I'd like for Ward Hamilton, who's on the staff of the General Counsel, Smithsonian Institution, who has been our very noteworthy, worthwhile, attentive to duty, hard-working lawyer, to come and say a word about our articles of incorporation that were submitted to the Recorder of Deeds office. So, Ward, would you say a word about that? Yeah.
I don't think there really needs much explanation for you all to understand the Articles of Incorporation. We went through them at a meeting back in July, I believe. They were set up really on a model supplied to me by the ad hoc committee for the establishment of the Neighborhood Museum Associates, and I simply work them into a form which would create a corporation, a nonprofit corporation under the DC Nonprofit Corporation Act, which has perpetual existence, which has members. Those members are defined in the articles, in the bylaws which you will approve tonight. The members will vote on the directors and the officers of the corporation in ways which are spelled out in the bylaws. The bylaws are the essential rules for the operation of the corporation. The articles of incorporation simply set out that you are the kind of corporation which can carry on charitable, educational business. You may receive funds. You may administer those for the purposes of the corporation. And I think it ought to set up the corporation in a way which will enable it to carry out its mandate in this community, John. I hope that if from time to time they need amendment, that they won't need drastic amendment, and that they're having been accepted by the recorder of deeds signifies that you've got a valid corporation.
I just might add that to give you a statement of the purpose upon which we will operate this corporation, and it is organized and operated exclusively as a charitable, scientific, literary, and educational institution defined in Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code and all of the regulations that are appertaining to that. We have abided by. So generally, that's the basis upon which we operate, which allows us to do anything. Literary means rapping too, I guess. But at any rate, might I present Mr. Jones now, who will, in a word, Alma, in a word, conduct the ratification of the bylaws. Thank you.
It seems to be a speedy moving meeting, in fact. This is the way we've tried to conduct business, historically, and hopefully from now on out we'll conduct it in that manner. Get things done to dispatch. As you mostly, all of you, I hope, have copies of the bylaws that were mailed to you. And if you don't have copies, just hold your hands up, because I think that
I have some extra copies.
Very important that you here.
Anybody else doesn't have a copy?
Yeah, John, I can.
Yeah. Bylaws provide us with the vehicle through which we implement the purpose of the corporation, nonprofit corporation. The papers of incorporation that John just read to you find expressed themselves through these bylaws. And if you might note, there are 12 articles. I would like to highlight for you, before we go into the actual formal adoption of these, just some of the highlights of the bylaws, the ones that seem to stand out in my mind as the very heart of this document. Number one, the name of the organization, which you see in front of you, the purpose, the membership, and the board of directors, and the officers. And the officers consisting of five principal officers: the chairman, vice chairman, secretary, treasurer, corresponding secretary. I might have missed one. The five, in addition to those five, we are provided with an allowance for 2 additional officers plus 1 youth under 21. And we want to make sure that the youth were represented in this body. So you see there. These officers will be elected after the board has been elected. The board, another important point to bear in mind, that the board will meet at least 3 times a year, based, number one, on the workload and on any special situations that might come up. So we have a deal of latitude in which to meet, but a minimum of 3 times a year, which I think you might say is, about quarterly almost. That's about as much as most organizations meet, I suppose. barring any special needs. And if any special needs arise, we'll be the first ones to meet. We don't like to meet just for the sake of meeting, but if we have to meet, we will meet. I think it's important that you make note in front of here of the purpose of the organization. This is what we have to ban. Number one is this includes or embodies the objective of the organization, the purpose of which we have come together as an incorporated body. I think should always stand foremost in our minds as we go about our day-to-day undertakings with this organization. Number one, I just don't want to bore you, but I do want to read this. Provide the opportunity for learning with a primary focus on neighborhood interests deriving from reflections on its heritage, including its educational and cultural background. And we want to underscore those last two, or that last phrase, including its educational and cultural background as it relates to Anacostia in particular. And number two, in developing opportunities for learning, the museum will pursue a variety of interrelated community-wide activities by which to achieve essential goals relevant to the fullest development and achievement for individual enrichment through diverse techniques of expression, such as multimedia presentation. Now, those may be some big-sounding words, but they aren't really that big because, you know, we've expressed that in terms of the kind of program we've had here in this museum. Historical, cultural, enrichment, photography, exhibits, various live exhibits, performing arts. All of that's embodied in these words. Well, if I may, I would like to move on to entertain a motion for the adoption of these of the bylaws for the operation of this organization.
Chairman.
Yes. Yes,
Under Article 12, recommendations by the Board of Directors, right?
yeah.
We have to elect the Board of Directors.
Pardon?
I think that's the proper step.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
We have not elected the Board of Directors yet.
Right, right.
It says that
Yeah, right, you're right. Yeah.
subject to ratification.
Yeah, right. Now, because John, that's your next item, yeah. I'm sorry, my error. Right.
We have a board right now.
Yeah.
It consists of yourself and
Yeah,
Almore
that's
Dale.
right. That's right.
The three of you could do it.
Is that Mr.
Yeah.
Jones was operating under the idea that the original board, in order to do business and develop articles of incorporation, had been appointed. And that interim board was comprised of Mr. Jones, Mr. Dale, and Lillian Smallwood. However, for sake of brevity and clarity, let's move and deal with that question, I would suggest,
Yeah.
by electing board,
Right.
then come back
Yeah.
to deal with how that board does its business.
You ready?
I'm not getting technical, but I just have to read this and just read the question.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Joe. You're quite correct. You go ahead, Joe.
Okay.
You're ready.
Yes, Ward.
No, this is simply a point
Okay.
in the bylaws. Later we'll talk to that.
Well, here's what I might say, is that we do have a listing, and I think everyone has in his hand this list of names. And I explained to you how this list of names came about. And if you have any question, we'd be happy to answer any question on it. However, for all intents and purposes, we have a slate for directors, a slate for the election of the directors. The number incorporated in the bylaws are 40. We have 31 nominees. So I would suggest that, Mr. Chairman, the House be open for additional nominees to the Board of Directors, after which we would vote on the entire slate, and all members would at that point become members of the Board of Directors. The only thing needing to be done behind that is ratification of the bylaws and then the nomination and election of officers who would become the executive committee of the board. So I think what I would suggest, if there are no further questions, that we would open the House for nominations to the board. Ms. Hutchinson.
Just one correction on the list of nominees. Number 15 should be Dr. Edward S. Pope, so that we don't confuse that with his son James.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Any other corrections? Any other additions? Mr. Dale?
I don't recognize any names used on this, and I would suggest that some youth be nominated.
Thank you, Mr. Dale. Your point's well taken. Mr. Blakey?
I would like to nominate
Mr. Richard Jones' name has been put in nomination. Ms. Marsh?
Nominate Gregory Reynolds. May I speak to that?
Will you speak to the nomination?
To the nomination just because Gregory Reynolds.
Yes.
Is that the same Gregory who was on the board prior to that? The thinking of the nominating committee was that we wanted youth who would actually be here in presence. Now, Gregory and other youth, Diane, Debbie and others are away at college. We wanted to give other youth in the community the same opportunity to have the same kind of involvement that they have. So we're really looking for some new youth who are here through the advisory council.
Ms. Marsh, are you withdrawing?
I guess I would contend, unless, well, if the list got very long with other qualified young people, I could be persuaded to withdraw the nomination, but until the list got so pressingly long,
Okay.
I would keep the nomination in.
Suppose we hold it in abeyance until we see.
Because Gregory has worked at the museum from the very first days, and it would seem useful to keep the continuity that he represents.
You're absolutely correct. All right, Jabbar? John Blake? John, how you spell your last name? Fine.
And to be present.
Just a minute. Is that we suggested, I don't have the letter here in front of me, the letter that we wrote to you, that if in fact you were going to nominate additional persons, we only asked that anyone who is nominated give their prior consent and indicate their willingness to serve. In the cases of the two names mentioned, they happen to be present. Yes. However, this is not a bylaw consideration. So if I were trying to abide by yet unratified bylaws, we're in a good way. We don't speak against the bylaws. Are there any other nominations? Ms. Hutchinson.
Mrs. Kathy Lewis. Mrs. Kathy Lewis.
Did she give her prior consent?
Yes, she did.
Fine. That's just a joke. Any other nominations? Polly?
I'd like to nominate Mrs. Carol Marsh.
Here's where we have a problem. Not with Ms. Marsh, of course. We have tried to elect a board that would not have staff members on it. Now, as you know very well, there are a large number of people on the Anacostia Museum staff, and certainly the staff understands their position in not being on the board to sit in judgment of considerations that would be undertaken by the board, and they're sitting there. With regard to Smithsonian, is that in trying to grapple with that particular idea and to keep at a high level the involvement of the Smithsonian under other committees that you have in front of you, which is on about the third page, is that we have made provision for Smithsonian Institution Advisory Committee to the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum, and I'm speaking now for the ad hoc committee in interpretation fashion, which we have great hopes will develop a high level of involvement, and that will provide for the board adequate input, not only from their base at the Smithsonian Institution, but would provide input from that sector into programs that will be, and situations that will be initiated out at this level by this board. So they would be called upon on the one hand, they would be thrusting up and suggesting to us on the other hand of kinds of things they think perhaps we ought to be doing. However, the bylaws, I think, only deal with the fact that staff members, and when we said staff, we meant Anacostia Neighborhood Museum staff. I don't think it pointedly speaks to Smithsonian staff, but you have our general thinking about that. Of course, we could be overruled. Is that clear, Polly? Perhaps not acceptable, but maybe a little clearer. Okay. Gregory?
I nominate Curtis McGruder.
Is he here? Oh. That's on the board.
That's on the board. Executive committee, but it doesn't preclude the
Right.
regular board.
Right. We've gotten up to 35. Can we go to 40? Any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Ms. Carol Bingham, 1800 Marsh Road, Southeast.
Carolyn, isn't it?
Carol Bingham. She's expressed an interest in the museum. Carolyn Bingham, B-I-N-G-H-A-M. Mrs.
Are there any other nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I move the nomination be closed if there further
Are you suggesting, Mr. Dale, in your motion that in order to reach the optimum of 40, that the board can, in some orderly fashion, consider increasing its numbers exclusive of any membership vote?
Authorized strength of 40.
Right.
If you only nominate, elect 35 at this particular meeting, then the board has the prerogative to add additional members that might come into the picture.
Okay, Warden, you were talking on that?
You have 40 to elect.
No, what we could do, you see, the easier way to do it would be reduce the number to 36.
I think you have to open some of
Okay. Okay.
do come.
Okay, can we hold that, Mr. Dale? Ward?
I would just say that my advice on that is to, by Article 4, Part 1 of the proposed bylaws, which has not yet been adopted, we have suggested that the directors are to be elected by a majority of the members. In other words, that the board does not have the power to add members on its own, except under certain circumstances. I'd say, under certain circumstances, yeah. Vacancies on the board shall be filled by members who have indicated their willingness to serve, whose names have been supplied by the nominating committee, elected by a majority vote of the board at a regular meeting of the board, and then they, and in the case, that's in the case of the vacancy occurring in the listed number. Now, if at the next meeting of the membership, there are further nominations to the board, and the number of directors on the board were to be increased to 40, that would be perfectly regular. But to have the board able to bypass the membership would probably not be acceptable under these bylaws. Under these bylaws, that wouldn't be the way that the corporation is established. The membership elects the directors and not the board. If you had a self-perpetuating board, you would have a situation where you wouldn't have any more responsibility slate of as many people are now nominated, elected, and then added to later on when you've got the members back together again.
Kathy? Okay.
I wanted to suggest that we put in the bylaws for just the number 36, which is another divisible by 3, which is
Mm-hmm.
make things easier rather than 1/3 section.
Well, I think you got a good point. I think Mr. Dale does too. I don't think that we need, although the bylaws call for 40, is that what we were trying to do was with this long list of names, still have an acceptable number of slots that could at this point be filled from the floor. And since we've arrived at a figure of 36, and I think we ought not struggle with it, that at some point in time, the bylaws would have to be changed, if tonight, to say that these members who've been elected, the strength of the board is 36. And it would be further reduced in an orderly fashion, based on not attendance of meetings and that kind of thing. So the board would automatically reduce itself down ultimately. Let's deal with that question at a later point. But Mr. Dale, can I entertain a motion from you again on the nominations?
I move that the nomination goes on the nominees already established. 36.
Can I hear a second? Okay, it's been moved and properly second that the nominations close with the present listing of these 36 names. And might I read them? Any question? The names are Mrs. Helen Allen, Mr. Stanley Anderson, Mr. Donald E. Ball, Mr. Percy Battle, Mr. Ted D. Coleman, Mr. Ben Davis, Mr. Almore Dale, Mr. Nathaniel Dixon, Mrs. Annette Doolittle, Mrs. Isabella Edwards, Mr. Joseph Fenwick, Honorable John D. Fauntleroy, Mrs. Mildred Jones Fisher, Mrs. Mary Gregory, Dr. Edward S. Hope, Mrs. Marion Hope, Mrs. Louise Hutchinson, Mr. Frederick Hill, Mr. Alton Jones, Mrs. Teresa Jones, Mrs. Rachel Lawrence, Mrs. Della Lowry, Reverend Larry Lewis, Mrs. Frances Mason Jones, Mrs. Cecilia Matthews, Mr. Russell Paxton, Dr. Charles Quarles, Mr. Frederick Saunders, Mrs. Polly Shackleton, Mrs. Lillian Smallwood, Mrs. Lillian Wright, Mr. Richard Jones, Mr. John Blake, Mrs. Kathy Lewis, Mr. Curtis Magruder, Mrs. Carolyn Bingham. Are all in favor of the slate as read to you? Would you let it be known by raising your hand? All who oppose? You oppose? Okay. Okay. Unanimous vote that these are, those names read in your hearing, are the first members of the board, newly elected board of directors of the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum Associates, Incorporated. Mr. Chairman, the next item on the agenda I would suggest be the ratification of bylaws.
To your pleasure, the proposed bylaws for the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum Associates Incorporated, the Articles of Incorporation. I entertain a motion for adoption of these bylaws for the operation of this Neighborhood Museum Associates Incorporated. Second.
Point of order. Do you know how many of these nominees are present today?
Why? Is that important?
Well, if they're going to be your new board, then
Just a minute, Kathy.
they have the power to adopt the articles, the bylaws, and then these are ratified by the membership. What we could have is an adoption by the initial board that's named in the Articles of Incorporation, and then a ratification by the membership. And then when you have the first meeting of the new board, then you can have a second adoption.
I don't understand because
You're going to have is the total new board here now?
Not everybody whose name I read, but acceptances have been gotten from all of these people to serve. Nobody was nominated without their agreeing to serve.
Well, will there be a quorum of the new board present tonight?
15. Yeah.
15, sure. I think we're 15, right?
Yeah, we got 15.
Yeah, it might be a good idea.
Okay, what about a roll call? Is that, suppose we do it this way. If you call your name, we'll accomplish two things. Others who don't know you will know, and I will make the tally of the roll call. We'll start Miss Allen. Okay, hold it. Kathy Lewis, Almore Dale. Annette Doolittle. Okay, John Blake. Curtis Magruder. Russell Paxton.
Terry D. Cole.
Mr. Coleman. Ms. Edwards.
Louise Hutchinson.
All right, 1, 2. Polly Shackleton. Polly, how we pass over you? 1, 2. Huh?
Alton Jones.
Oh, Alton Jones. Yeah. You know, he said it. I said, well, what you want?
Yeah, just 3, 2.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Just on the nose. Just on the nose.
We are living right there.
Right on the nose.
All right, Ward, what we were moving to,
Unsatisfied.
Yeah.
okay,
Unsatisfied.
was to get a motion to ratify the bylaws.
Well, I had to first determine that you had a quorum here so you could do business. That's what we did.
We got more decorum now. Stanley Anderson.
I guess we can move on.
Ratify the bylaws.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Understand.
We've had a motion. Yeah.
Move that the board adopt the bylaws.
Second for that. Question?
I'm rather new to this, and there's a very simple point of clarification that I'd like to understand. This is the first time you will be incorporated, yes?
Exactly, right.
Yes. All right. Now, what benefits will be accrued as a result of your being incorporated? I thought that you were a branch of the Smithsonian, or we are. Therefore, that we have many benefits already. What additional benefits, and to whom will these benefits benefit?
Well, I might suggest that the benefits would be that for the first time, we have an organized, duly elected, over against whomsoever will let him come, operation. The responsibilities of the board, as I see it, would be to give pointed attention to the affairs of the museum, number one, to be sure that this museum does indeed represent as adequate an impression or interpretation as can be achieved of the needs of this community. That's an input involvement kind of relationship. Ultimately, what would come out of it would be programs that would need to be justified as well as developed, which cost money. The funding sources are namely the Smithsonian Institution, private individuals, as well as foundations. So the board would be speaking to, with regard to justification, that this is a felt need of a recognized body, responsive to the further growth and development of this museum, and a body that must be recognized.
You have to be incorporated to have a board that does this.
If it's going to be legal.
Okay. I meant
not receive funds.
You're right.
Certain foundations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Insist on your being listed as an incorporated charitable institution.
Thank you.
I guess that's the most salient point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. Did you entertain a motion?
Yeah, we had entertained a motion for the adoption of the bylaws, and I believe they were seconded by Mr. Dale.
In
Right.
Article 4, section, shall consist of 15, is that to be changed or amended?
I don't know. I don't think so. Huh? Down. Quorum down, John. is
What are you saying?
I would suggest that you amend that bylaw down. For one thing, you may by one bylaw.
Speak up a little louder so everybody can hear.
I think on that
With
matter,
regard to your question, Annette,
We're getting a legal opinion on it.
well, it's not a legal opinion, it's just a piece of advice. Under the bylaws, the board of directors could fluctuate anywhere between 15 and 40 members. If it eventually happens that you by one process of attrition or another arrive at 15 members, and you have a bylaw which says that all 15 of them must be there, that might be rather difficult to live up to. And I'd suggest that may be advisable to the corporation at large and the board of directors that's sitting here in front of us to choose a more flexible quorum, a quorum that's down closer to the level of expected attendance, so that you can do business even though there show up, say, only 10 or so, or maybe 7 or 8.
okay, this is a question
This is
to
a
the
question.
motion.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
In response to what he's just said, wouldn't we have to, though, first adopt the bylaws before we could amend them in any fashion?
If
Well,
we
you could
got with
amend
it
them as
before
you
we
went,
do
it
it,
seems to me.
we don't have to do it after.
Easier, yeah.
I don't care one way or the other.
Just would be.
So
So
with
this-
regard to the question, we can,
Make a motion, I would like to put it in that.
That the quorum.
Make the quorum a percentage, say, 1/3, 30%. Will constitute a quorum.
it's 12.
That's 12.
And I think that's a reasonable number to expect.
Okay.
Ought to be one even, but it ought to be, it should be, one extra.
11, would 11 be acceptable?
I think.
You don't like 13?
I just suggested 11 because most people don't want to do 13.
We're not giving, may I just clarify, you're saying just 1/3, no number mentioned, no specific number, just
So
a
if-
third of how many
Yeah,
other members?
yeah, so if the total number drop, then you won't have to worry about that number. 'Cause our membership may drop down to 25, you know.
Yeah, I'd like at this time, I look at this list here, and, I don't know what the regulation is, no, I don't know what the situation is, but there's a person who's worked very diligently, not only with this program, but many programs I've been associated with, beginning with preschool, when she served as a consultant, and later as a consultant with the record department, then as a consultant with the foundation, and that brought her here as a consultant to the Smithsonian. And I was just wondering if that restricts, because I think she'll be moving on from Smithsonian, she won't be there, too much longer, because she likes to go on to other things. That's Carol Marsh. I was wondering why she could not be a board member, so she isn't on the payroll, she's only serving as a consultant. And I'd like to propose her, that makes clear sense.
I would say this, that the question was raised, and an unreasonable or reasonable answer was given by me, as far as the
To
answer.
the same question.
The
What's
same
been raised
question.
tonight?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
However, we've been operating, this is a free operation, is that we do have a motion on the floor to ratify the bylaws, and Mr. Dale was making an amendment to it.
Yeah.
Now, I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, that with regard to Mr. Anderson's question, that we can suspend the rules and deal with it now, or we can carry through the motion and deal with it immediately afterwards.
Yeah, I think, if that's okay with,
I think the present status is that Mr.
Yeah.
Dale agreed to a number.
No, he agreed to.
Percentage.
No, percentage, yeah,
That was
his percentage,
1/3.
1/3 of whatever the board constituted number
Odd
might
number or
be.
even, doesn't make any difference,
Yeah.
right? Okay, I think all in favor of Mr. Dale's amendment to the motion, let it be known by raising your hand.
The ayes have it.
Okay, those who oppose? Okay, the ayes have it. So, under Article 4, Section 1, that changes to 1/3. No less than 1/3 members elected by majority vote.
No.
1/3.
Article 4, item 4, Mr.
Consists of at least
Article 4.
1/3 of the members present voting.
1/3 of the members present voted. Yeah, up here, I think it is.
Oh, okay, I have it back here too. Okay. At least 1/3. How does it read now?
It is,
Shall consist of at least 1/3. Okay, fine. Now the main motion.
I think we entertained already a motion for adoption of the bylaws, and now the bylaws have been, the motion's been presented, and the amendment passed. Is there any further discussion?
That the word chairman or vice chairman be changed to chairperson. Wherever it appears in the
Amendments live.
Second to it.
I second.
Is there a second? Ms. Hutchinson? It's moved and second.
We came down here too many nights, right?
Call for the question.
Moved and second. Question?
Mr. Chairman, I raise a question. Should that be for vice chairperson too?
everywhere where the word chairman,
If it's a woman sitting in the chair at the time, you say chairman, maybe the message.
chairperson.
Chairperson.
Okay.
Just change the tag.
Okay, Mr. Chairman.
I'm just about confused now. It's been moved and seconded. I believe that the bylaws be accepted as amended.
On that amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry. On Mrs. Lewis's amendment, that the chairman be designated as chairperson, vice chairperson, wherever those titles appear. Okay. All in favor by raise your hands. Consensus. Now we get to the last motion for acceptance of the bylaws. We've had a motion that they be adopted, and I think it was seconded. All those in favor, raise your hand. The bylaws are accepted. I'm sorry, those opposed? Any opposed? Bylaws are accepted as written for the operation of this organization. That's it, Jim.
Okay, the other item was the question, Mr. Anderson.
My question
Yeah.
raised, I thought it was germane, sort of to the fact that we were discussing 1/3 vote, and I noticed in looking over this particular list of board of directors, I did not see Ms. March's name. I wanted to propose earlier, unfortunately, I'm a little late. But I was just wondering what would prevent a consultant from serving on the board of directors. I can see a person under direct employment? What's the rationale?
Oh, yeah. The only rationale, Mr. Anderson, was employees of this museum or employees of the Smithsonian, that they would not serve on the board of directors. However, with regard to employees of the Smithsonian Institution, whom we all agree have served, I might say today, valiantly, however, at a high level in the development of this museum, under other committees in the bylaws, provision has been made for Smithsonian Institution Advisory Committee to this museum, feeling the continued need for involvement from that level. That's the only provision that has been made for employees of the Smithsonian Institution. However, if the person in question is not an employee, it puts another whole light on the whole question.
Are you consultants? You both?
She's both.
Seriously, are you a consultant?
She said she's both.
I don't know. I think that fall under and if it's easier for the, well, I'm very happy to serve the Network Museum in whatever capacity is most useful for the Network Museum. And I'd be happy to serve on the advisory committee, or if it's more appropriate for me to serve on the Smithsonian Institution committee, I'd be happy to serve on that. I'm very happy to do whatever would be useful.
Mr. Anderson, as you know, and I would be derelict if I didn't say, whatever this body, this duly constituted body, wants to do, they can do it.
I just, wonder, even if you think in terms of an employee who offered something to this board, tremendous number of people have on the board anyway. It seems to me that an employee of the institution probably could serve. I think it would be excellent for us to have folks who are their employees.
Yeah.
I don't see where they would be in conflict. That's the point I'm trying to make for discussion purposes.
Speak to the same point.
To the same point, to further clarify, we met with employees of the, we being the nominating committee, did meet with employees of this museum to be sure that we did not omit or overtly otherwise anyone who had been very helpful to the museum, and it was their feeling that they didn't think it was appropriate, that it might represent at some point a conflict where employee and employer would be sitting on the same board discussing things that might affect one or the other. So that recommendation came to the committee from the employees of the city.
Was a discussion from the standpoint of employees of the greater Smithsonian, if I could use that term, greater in quotes. And I only borrowed that because we started as the great Anacostia.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we had, Stanley, we did have very deep feeling about the people that, with the Smithsonian, had been with us all the way along. As a matter of fact, I was, if I may make a personal reference, sent in names of people, staff members on the museum. And then after further deliberation, we thought we might strike a happy medium. And as Mrs. Hutchinson mentioned, some of the staff people here did agree that there is room here for people from the museum to serve in a very good capacity, and the other committees, which would be appointed by the executive board. And this would include special projects or anything that would come from the Smithsonian staff persons, as well as from outside, asking them to do certain things or engage them from outside. The board, the board of directors. Or the Smithsonian.
The terminology, I don't want to prolong the discussion. But it seems to me that the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum, if there were key persons on that, on the general board of what they call the regents, what's the big board? Regents, that if we want to duly elect as a salute, and I think at this point in Mrs. Marsh's career, and we never really had this had it not, been for her, and I'd like us to suspend the rules and vote me down. necessary. I would like the record to show that I would like to place your name in nomination for election to this particular board. Board of members. The members should vote of the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum. Wouldn't have been here, you know. That's right. I feel it.
Yeah, I don't think we can carry it through that way. I mean, I think it's a violation.
I'd like to speak to the motion. We felt that this Smithsonian Advisory Committee was an honorary position. That we tried to set aside a capacity so that we would indeed honor those Smithsonian employees that had worked so hard. I know Mrs. Marsh's name came up.
Yeah.
We really struggled with this question. The problem with that again became, if one employee, why not several more? I have no feelings either way, Mrs. Marsh, for or against your participation. My feeling just was that this is a more advisory,
What was the number that we came to if we included all the Smithsonian people? You remember? I think there were 13 additional names.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
That would, you know, if one, then, well, those other cats say, well, that kind of thing, you know. But at any rate, a motion has been made, Mr. Chairman, and has been seconded.
Okay.
Shall we vote on the motion? That's what we should do right now. All in favor, let it be known by raising your hand. 4. All who oppose? I think that I just might interpret that motion as one of a legal thing, precedential with regard to our relationship with the rest of the
record show when history is made. This motion is made.
and certainly our dear friend, advocate Backer, still that. And we call upon Carol Marsh as we have in the past. So, Mr. Chairman, I think the other item on the agenda, and with past time, is the election of the officers for the Board of Directors. And as I see it, we have a chairperson, a vice chairperson, treasurer, secretary, corresponding secretary, plus 1 youth and an additional member, making a total of 7 persons who will serve on the executive committee. Shall we, in this deliberation, make nominations for all of these positions at one time, or shall we do them one at a time? To start off with the chairman, Mr. John? All right. Almore?
One question. Don't we still have the ratification of the bylaws to give out membership, which basically is the same goal, I think, all out that should be followed?
I think we better run the tape back. We just did that, Mr. Dale.
No, there are 2 separate.
We just did that.
The 2 separate.
There are 2 separate bodies here tonight. That's right. There are 2 separate bodies here tonight. There's both the board of directors and the total membership of the corporation.
Right.
The bylaws, once adopted by the board of directors, are to be ratified by the membership, so that all those who are not members of the board may vote also in this particular vote.
You're right, Mr. Dale.
Yeah.
I might even qualify as a member.
Okay, we're calling for the ratification of the bylaws at this point. Okay, it's been so moved by Mr. Anderson, seconded by Mr. Blake and Mr. Fisher, that the bylaws of this corporation be ratified. Question? Be ratified by the membership. All in favor, let it be known by raising your hand. All who oppose? None. The bylaws are duly ratified. Shall we move on with the election of the officers? And I think it would be common consensus that we handle them one at a time. Can we agree common consensus? All right, for the chairperson, the floor is open for nominations. Mrs. Hutchinson.
I would like to nominate Mr. Terry
Mr. Terry
Coleman.
Mr. Terry Coleman has been nominated. Joe?
I decline the nomination in favor of nominating Mr. Alton Jones.
Mr. Dale has declined. Mr. Alton Jones. Any other nominations? Jabbar? Mr. John Blake has been nominated. Any other nominees?
I'd like to nominate Mrs. Louise.
Ms. Louise Hutchinson has been nominated. Joe? It's been moved and probably second that the nominations be closed on these 4 names. All in favor? Those who oppose? Question. Any questions on the nominees? Would you, for an example, like, well, I'll just ask Mr. Coleman to stand. Everybody can see him. Mr. Coleman. Thank you, Mr. Coleman. Mr. Jones. Mr. John Blake. Mrs. Louise Hutchinson. Quiet. The nominations have been closed. Shall we move with the election of the chairperson for the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum Associates? Shall we start at the bottom? Mrs. Louise Hutchinson, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mr. John Blake, all in favor? 1. Mr. Alton Jones, all in favor? 8. Mr. Terry Coleman, all in favor? 1. If my eyes don't deceive me, you have elected as chairperson of the Anacostia Neighborhood Museum Associates, the very distinguished Mr. Alton Jones. Mr. Jones, might I ask you to carry on the election, or would you want me to serve?
I'll let you serve out.
All right. Shall we nominate for the vice chairperson? The floor is now open for nominations. Kathy? 2 minutes. All right, we'll run it out.